Hello everyone, welcome to the JK Academy. This channel aims to talk about architecture and urban design in the most simplest way. So if you're interested, please subscribe to the channel. This video is about understanding TODs, especially focusing on the Japan model. Here is the content of today's lecture, starting from Introduction to TOD. So TOD, it stands for Transit-Oriented Development, and typically it is known to have started in the US since 1990s. Well, the reason why I want to introduce about the Japanese model of TOD is because there is a difference in the way that we have developed, which is not exactly the same as the one that everybody knows about, which is the TOD that started from the US. So the Japanese model has already existed since 1910, and what is it that makes the difference between the US model and the Japanese model? So first of all, I will talk about the US TOD. The US TOD has two concepts. The first one is joint development. And basically it is about how to link subways with the built environment above ground. So what does this mean is that above ground there are different stakeholders who are developing differently. And then you have the subway that needs to be linked to the above ground development. And so the joint development allows these stakeholders to negotiate, and then you are able to link the different levels together so that the accessibility of the user will be having a very convenient linkway to exit from the subway and also to enter from the ground level to the subway. So this is the first concept, which is the joint development. The second one is called transit supportive development, and it is an urban version of the joint development. So this one, the unique aspect of this is that it is a development that are centered around the station. And at that time, when this was introduced, in the American cities, they tend to be very separated from the railway development and the residential area. So there tends to be no kind of a communication between the residential area plus the train development. So this transit supportive development is a concept that introduced to essentially link the residential area with the station. So that was the key idea behind this TSD. Simply to wrap up, the US model of TOD is a joint development plus transit supportive development. And then this is a development methodology. Therefore, the benefit of this is that you can replicate it and you can apply in different cities. So this is why TOD became very well known, and then it has been used in many different countries. So going a little bit deeper into slightly the characteristics of the US model TOD, it has some common elements which are kind of like the framework of TOD, and there are three elements that can be found. One is a mixed-use development. Most of the time it's about mixed-use development. And the second one is about the development that is close to and well served by transit. And then the third one is the development that is conducive to transit riding. So these are the common elements that you can see in various types of TOD case studies. Less universally, but sometimes we can find that TOD is about compactness, and then it is also about introducing a more of a pedestrian and cycle-friendly environment. And also near the station, you tend to find public and civic spaces. And also because of the kind of joint development that it has, the station becomes a community hub. So these are some of the characteristics that you can find in the US TOD. Now moving on to the Japanese TOD. So this is the main part of today's lecture. There are two concepts that can be found in the Japanese TOD model. So the first one is about private railway company development in suburban areas. The second one is about integrated development as a business model for private railway companies. So just to give you a brief history to explain about the first item is that first of all, in Japan, we have a national railway which is called the JR, Japan Railway, and it used to be a former national railway company, but currently it has been privatized, but still we maintain it, we call it the JR. And so the JR, they were the ones first developing the national railway. However, the private railways also joined to construct a network that is, in total, we have like around 7,600 kilometers by the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, at the very, very beginning, it was more about freight, and it wasn't really about the passenger. But eventually, because of the convenience that it has in terms of mass transportation system, both the JR and the private railway companies started to construct a lot of different stations within the city areas. And so one of the important events that happened for the case of Tokyo is that this company, Den Toshi Company, which was actually influenced by the Garden City concept, was established in 1918 by someone called Eiji Shibusawa. And so this one I'm going to explain a little bit detail later on. So just please remember this company name, which is Den Toshi Company. The other thing that happened in terms of the history is that there was a Great Kanto earthquake in 1932. So all the areas in Tokyo, it was burned down because of the earthquake. And then earthquake is not about the seismic that destroys the city, but actually after the earthquake happens, usually there will be fire, and then fire destroys all the housings and all the buildings. So this was a huge, it destroys a huge surface area of Tokyo, and then it becomes almost a tabula rasa. So in fact, it's actually a tragedy, but on the other hand, we can say it's also an opportunity to do a redevelopment. So the first, I would like to mention the first point about after the earthquake is that this Yamanote line, which is supposed to loop, I mean, those people who know Tokyo, you will know that Yamanote line forms a loop. And this loop was established because of the earthquake. And then I will explain you a little bit in detail in the next slide. And then also, because of the event, it also fostered the suburban development by the private railway companies. The private railway companies such as Tokyu, Seibu, and Odakyu. So these are the most commonly known private railway companies in Tokyo. So if I zoom, so this is the loop that I'm talking about. This is the Yamanote line, and then currently you can see that it is forming a loop. However, before 1932, meaning before the earthquake, this wasn't forming the loop. So it was actually disconnected at this point. And the reason why it was disconnected is because around this area here, it was a very densely built up area with wooden constructed houses. So it wasn't possible to actually connect the Yamanote line. However, because of the destruction that happened after the 1932 earthquake, all these houses, they were burnt down. And then this is the moment that this railway was able to kind of link together. So it's quite important that this is forming a ring city, because economy is created through flow, and then actually the loop is essential kind of icon in terms of the transportation system in Tokyo. So the private company, typically they would plug onto one of these Yamanote line station, and then they will go and towards the outside, the outskirts, which are the suburban area. And the important thing is that around inside the Yamanote line, we have the metro line, which is the Tokyo Metropolitan line, which are the underground. And then the rest, which are the outside, typically we have most of the residential area. And then these are kind of joined along the private railway company. So this is why private railway company is extremely important in terms of the Japanese style transit-oriented development, the TOD, and we typically call this Ensen Kaihatsu. So it is literally, if I translate it into English, it means development alongside a railway line. Moving on to the next one, which is about integrated development as a business model for private railway company. There are two key concepts behind this, which is about transit corridor concept, and the other one is land use scheme. So transit corridor concept, it means that you have the Yamanote line, which is schematically it's showing here with the JR here line, which is the Yamanote line. And so as I mentioned before, that the private railway company will plug onto one of the stations along the Yamanote line, and then it will develop a transit corridor along extending towards the suburb. So this is the first part. Transit corridor concept is about the fact that the private railway company, it will plug onto the Yamanote line or the JR line, and then it will extend outwards to the suburb. And for that, the second one is very important because the development of this transit corridor will happen in relationship with introducing institution, schools, recreation, and also it is developed together with the residential area. So this is why, if I summarize very simply, this is why it is a business model, and I will go deep in detail about these three items that you see. The first one, which is about the institution, schools, recreation. What do I mean by this? And then also about the terminal station development, because this railway company will also be plugged on to the Yamanote line, so they will have something happening also in the central area, which is here. And then also in terms of the suburban area, it is essential to also develop the residential. So all of this as a package is actually the TOD. Now I'm going to explain about the first part of the integrated development, which is about institutions, schools, and recreation. And what do I mean by this? Is here I have introduced three examples. The first one is in Kobe area, and Kobe is first one is Kobe. The second one is Kansai area, and these two are not Tokyo. They are in another city, which is almost maybe 500 kilometers away from Tokyo. But it is again some kind of a very important city for Japan. And in Kobe area, there is a city called Takarazuka. And then in Takarazuka, they have opened up an opera school for girls this is around this period, 1911, 1913. And by introducing this opera school for girls, what happened is that it kind of generated a different flow of people. So usually you will have some important iconic buildings or iconic functions around the city center. But the intention that they had at that moment in terms of TOD is that because you have something that is being developed in the suburban area, the flow of people will change. So instead of everyone going towards the center, now you have this nodal point, which is a school, and there will be a lot of people commuting every day towards school, and then therefore the flow of people will change. And so another one that is Koshien, which is also in Kansai area near Kobe, there is a place called Koshien, and this Koshien is famous for the baseball stadium and leisure activities. So again, it's not situated right in the center, but it is situated right towards the suburban area. So therefore the flow of people will change. And typically these baseball or like leisure activities will happen during let's say weekends or during the holiday season. So the intention behind is that the change of flow will happen in terms of everyday transit, is that if you place a school, then it will the flow will change in terms of weekdays, mostly for the weekdays. But for the weekends, if you place some leisure activities, flow will change during the weekends. So that is the kind of dynamic concept that they introduce in terms of as a part of the TOD concept. And for the Tokyo case, they have introduced in 1950s amusement park in this area called Futako Tamagawa. And the photo here, it shows this amusement park. And again, it is not in the center of Tokyo. So here is a map of Tokyo during this period. And this is Shibuya, which is of course along the Yamanote line. And a lot of the private railway company stations extends towards the suburban area. And along there, you have this Futako Tamagawa, which is here, and it has an amusement park. And the rest of the places, actually, it has some iconic leisure activities that you might be able to kind of understand as well. Like, for example, you have another kind of like a baseball or leisure activity area along this Tamagawa River. And also more towards this end, you also have ice rink, and also you also have maybe a spa that you can enjoy during the weekend. So along with this, again, there is also the concept of scattering the school around this area. So here there is a very important institution, a university that is located here, and also there are other universities scattered around this area as well. So as I mentioned, the TOD the TOD is considered as a business model in Japan, because the development is actually creating some kind of economy towards the suburban area, and then the dynamic flow that people will move towards this end but also towards the suburban area. This dynamism is creating the economy. And the table here shows the revenue basis for a railway company, and here it's very clearly shown that this is the revenue for fare, so the tickets, mainly tickets, and then these ones, the B section, is showing other than the train ticket. So the percentage that you get for the revenue of the non-rail related activity is higher for the private company. So this one, JR East, is the national railway, and the rest of it, they are all private railway company. And then you can see from the number very clearly that the profit that they get is not necessarily from the fare, the ticket, but actually it's from the development that they're doing. And for the JR, why is it so low for the JR? Is unfortunately JR, they don't own land, so therefore the only kind of small little development that they can do is above the station. So this is why the proportion in terms of this item here is extremely low, and most of the revenue is from the tickets. Now moving on to the next integrated development, which is about terminal station development. And I will give Shibuya as a specific example. Before moving on, I'm going to introduce a brief history of the railways in Shibuya. And so Shibuya station started from 1885 with the Japanese National Railway. So this is the JR. Then 1907, Tamagawa Electric Railway started. And this one is actually a tramway. So currently you don't see this anymore. Followed by in 1927, Tokyo Yokohama Railway. And currently this one is called the Tokyu Toyoko line. So Tokyu is the important keyword here because Tokyu is the name of the developer. Now, 1938, Teito Railway. Currently, it is called Keio Inogashira Line. Keio is another is a company name, another developer company name, and they also do a lot of development along the transit corridor. 1938, Tokyo Rapid Railway opened. So now this one is currently it's the Tokyo Metropolitan Ginza line. So it's the underground. So from now on, I'm going to explain a bit more in detail about the Shibuya development. The photo here you see is an image that has been, it's an image from this side towards this end. And actually here you will understand that many of the buildings that you see, they are developed by Tokyo. So I don't know if you can see this name here, it says Tokyo. So Tokyo is a name of the developer. And then they are responsible for developing many of the places in Shibuya. So they don't only do the suburban area development, but because this transit corridor will plug onto the Yamanote line. So in this case, the station here, there is a Yamanote line, and then therefore it plugs onto this, and then therefore they also have they also try to develop the hub city, in this case, which is Shibuya. So I'm going to explain you some brief history of the Tokyo development that happened around Shibuya. So first they opened up a department store called Toyoko Department Store in 1934. Currently it's under development. They demolished the old one in 2020, which is last year, and then they are going to open a new one. In 1956, they opened this Tokyu Bunka Kaikan. The Tokyu Bunka Kaikan, it means it's a cultural facility. And the dome that you see here is actually a planetarium. Another big event that happened for Tokyo is the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games. This has nothing to do with Tokyo, but it contributed in changing all this area. And okay, it has nothing to do with Tokyo, but all this area, it used to be residential for the US Army. But as an opportunity for the Tokyo Olympic Game development, all this area were being transformed into sports activities, and also there were the headquarters of the NHK broadcast company. And this one, of course, everybody knows it's a gymnasium that was being designed by Kento Tange. So this photo here is showing the Tokyo 2020 case, but of course you can see that it is being used for the event. And because of this, a lot of the area has been actually developed together with this station called Harajuku. But because it's quite proximate from Shibuya and Harajuku, this area were being filled up with many activities as well. In 1965, they opened the Shibuya Tokyo Plaza, and unfortunately, it was destroyed in 2015 already, so you can't see the old one. But it was redeveloped, and now you see a new building. And the image that you see here is what you will see of today. All of these areas, they were redeveloped already, and then the form that you will see of today will be something like this. And actually, a lot of the famous architects are involved in the design of the building. For example, this one is done by Kengo Kuma. In 1967, Shibuya Tokyo department store opened, and another department store by Seibu developer was opened in 1968. Then 73, Shibuya Parco opened. 78, Shibuya Tokyo Hands opened. And in 1979, Shibuya 109 opened. In 1989, Tokyo Bunkamura was opened. This Tokyo Bunkamura is a theater. So to summarize the effect of the Shibuya development, you can see that there's a train station, and then you have the railway. This is the Yamanote line, and then this one is the private railway that goes towards the suburban area. And what you see is, unlike a concentration of development around the station area, they are actually developing towards a further end. And what happens with this is that because of the fact that you are placing these big nodes in more of a far area from the station, the implication that it has is that in between there will be small little shops and retails and activities that will open up to actually fill in the gaps. So this is also a strategy that they have, which is a mini version of the suburban transit corridor development that they have in relation to the land use scheme, whereby you develop something that is away from the center, and then because of this you are creating a new flow. And similar to this, in more of a micro scale, they are developing a little bit further first, and then because of this the rest will start to fill up the space, and this creates the dynamism and the flow inside the city area. Next is about the residential area development. So to explain about this, I need to go back a little bit and then explain you about this Deien Toshi company, which was influenced by the Garden City concept. And the important keywords here to remember is, of course, the name of the company, and also the Ensen Kaihatsu, and also it's about the land use scheme. So what do I mean by this? Before moving on, I will explain you a little bit about the history of this Japanese garden city. And there is a difference between the Howard's Garden City concept. The Howard's Garden City concept was developed by the British, and the concept for this garden city was that you have the central city, But then you create a satellite city, which is more in the suburban area. You are being connected with a very good transportation system, which of course is the railway. But this garden city, it has a control in the number of population, therefore it's also a compact city. But the difference, the big difference between Howard's garden city and the Japanese garden city is that in Howard's garden city, you are self-sustained within that city itself. So you do not commute towards the city center, but moreover, it's more of a self-sustained city. All the activities and businesses will happen within that area. However, the proposal by Shibusawa is that you don't live and work in the compact city, but rather you will live in this very pleasant suburban area with greenery, and then you commute towards the center. So that is a big difference between the garden city of Howard, and then by introducing this new way, he's proposing a new lifestyle for businessmen, and by providing a good living environment and good access to city center with this transportation system. So here is a very basic drawing of the garden city proposed by Shibusawa Eiichi, and you have the railway, the transit corridor here. And then here you have this pleasant greenery. Of course, today you don't see this kind of greenery anymore. It's full of residential area. But at that time, it was still very a rural area with a lot of greenery. And here, there are three small towns that were being developed, and it's still there. It still exists of today. One of it is called Senzoku District. Another one, Okayama District, and the other one, Den Chofu District. And Okayama District is very, very famous because it has this important university located there, which is called Tokyo Institute of Technology. So again, it's the same concept of what I've explained before. It's important to place this kind of schools whereby for everyday usage of the train, you are creating a different flow, not towards the city center, but from the city center towards the suburban area. So this is why placing this important institution here is quite strategic in that sense. So this is a map to show the Senzoku district. So you see here you have the railway, and then you have the station here, and then you will have the residential area that has been developed. And now I would like to focus a bit more in the development around the station. The local station development is probably the most important key point about the Ensen Kaihatsu. And typically in this Ensen Kaihatsu, or the development around the local station, contains, first of all, the station plaza that looks something like this. It's not really a huge open space. It's more of a gathering space for people to meet up and to do some small activities, and then another one which is very important that is typically located right next to the station is this something called the Shotengai. And Shotengai is a Japanese word that means commercial district, and the literal translation is the commercial district, but actually it contains a social space as well. So what do I mean by this? I will explain you later. But first of all, to know a little bit about the commercial district, Shotengai consists of small shops, usually specified into a certain topic. So they might only sell fruits or vegetables or meat, or maybe it's a pharmacy, or they only sell stationery, or they only sell clothes, etc., etc. But essentially the aim is to provide local activities for everyday needs. So when you are living along this transit corridor, you, in terms of the everyday activities and everyday needs, it's all fulfilled from the Shotengai. So the Shotengai is more relatable to the everyday kind of everyday needs. And then on top of this, what it does is that Shotengai actually forms a shop owner association. And this what they do is that they don't only discuss about how to manage the shops and retails and etc., etc., but actually they also organize and host seasonal festivals and events. So these festivals and events, it could be something that is a bit more seasonal and local, but it could be something that is big, as involving the whole entire community who are living in this area. And moreover, it can also attract some people from outside as well when it comes to a very big festival such as what we call the Matsuri. And so schematically speaking, you can understand the Ensenkai Hatsu, which is focusing on the local station development, is that you have the railway, you have the trains, and then you have the train station here. And around the train station, you have this station plaza, a small open space. And then you will have something called the Shotengai that looks something like this. And whether it has an arcade or not, it depends on the context. This one is another location, and it's actually called the Shimokitazawa. Again, you have the railway. Actually, for this station, you have two railway, but schematically it's the same. You have the railway, and then you have a small little plaza in front of the station, and then you will have these shopping streets. So in the case of Shimokitazawa, you don't have the arcades. It's more of a street space, street market spaces, but it's supposed to serve for the everyday needs. But because in the case of Shimokitazawa, it's relatively well-known area, and then therefore a lot of people from other places, they might come. So it might go beyond the everyday needs, but the initial concept is, of course, to serve for the everyday needs for the local residents who are living in this area. And the event that I'm talking about is something like this. So the local festivals are being organized by the Shotengai people, the association, which are the owners of these retail shops, and then they will organize this event. In the case of Shimokitazawa, it will look something like this, with what we call the mikoshi. In fact, from the photo itself, you may not understand, but actually for Shimokitazawa case, they will have a narrative that is more relatable to Shimokitazawa. But if you go to another local place, the narrative might be different from this. So you might have a different kind of ornament that would signify a different narrative that is more relatable to the local kind of story of how this city emerged. So that is quite nice thing about the Tokyo festival, that usually around the summer period towards autumn, they will hold this kind of event, but in each local area, they will have a different narrative. So you will see different symbols everywhere. And then some little details are quite different from one to the other. So that is the unique thing about the Tokyo kind of the Tokyo festival, and also it's relatable to what they have in the local area, which is organized and managed by this Shotengai. The key points of Japanese TOD can be identified into the following three aspects. The first one, which is about the suburban development. The second one is about the economy and the flow and how culture emerges from this. And the third one is about the Ensen Kaihatsu, which is related to the community development. The first one is about the suburban development, and typically in Japan, the TODs are more developed by the private company, and then they will have a terminal station that is linked with the JR, which in this case is the Yamanote line, and then they will be developing, extending towards the outskirts. And these developments were enhanced because there was an earthquake in 1932, and a lot of the houses were burnt down because of the fire after the earthquake, and then a lot of people, they were seeking for housing, and therefore it was not enough to develop by the country, and then therefore the private companies initiated to develop a residential area more towards the suburbs. So 1932 earthquake was also kind of a trigger for the development to boost the TOD, for the TOD in Japan. The second point is about how the economy has been generated through the dynamic flow, and also it creates a culture as a result. So what do I mean by this is that you have the transit corridor and then the residential area that are developed towards the suburbs, and then here you will have homes, the residential area here, and then it will create a flow towards the city center during maybe the weekday in the morning, for example, morning and afternoon, which will create from home, from the residential area, people will commute and then take the train towards the city center to go to somewhere else. But then at the same time, by placing high schools and universities, it will also create a flow towards the suburban area. So this is one aspect of the dynamic flow that you can maybe see during the weekday. On the weekends, many people who are living in this area from home, they might want to go to the city center in order to purchase something that is not to be found in the local area. So the local area, they will have this shotengai, which is to serve for the everyday needs, but there might be something that they would like to purchase, or there might be some activities that they would like to do, which is not in their local area. So they will maybe go towards the center, and then in the central area they will have all these activities that are non-everyday shopping, and then also some leisure cultural activities. So here's a zoom in of for example Shibuya, and then Shibuya, they will have a department store, and then department store, they sell something that you cannot maybe purchase in your local area. So this is why it creates an incentive for people to go towards the city center. And also there are theaters, there are cinemas, there are also these kind of cultural activities that are being placed, and then therefore it also creates an incentive for people to move towards the city center. And on the other hand, they also create this kind of amusement parks or baseball stadium and so on and so on, some kind of recreational activities that probably takes more space, and then therefore it's more appropriate to kind of position them in the suburban area. And because of that, on the weekends, you create again a flow towards the suburb, and again there will be a dynamic flow that goes towards the city center, but also at the same time it will create another kind of flow towards the suburbs. So that dynamism actually in a longer period or in a longer term, it kind of creates a culture. The last one, which is about the Ensen Kaihatsu. To recap, it is about development alongside a railway line, and it's a community development. So this Ensen Kaihatsu is all about the local activities that are happening around the residential area, and then they will have something called the Shotengai, and then the Shotengai is a commercial district, but it has this social space as well. And then therefore the Ensen Kaihatsu somehow contributes to the placemaking for the local community. So schematically speaking, to repeat myself, you have the railway, and then you typically have a station plaza, and then you have this Shotengai, which are the shopping streets that serves all the everyday needs. And these developments are in relationship with the community, because the shop owners, they will form an association, and because of the shop association that they have, it also initiates and manages and organizes some events and festivals for the community to actually participate and join. So Ensen Kaihatsu involves a lot of the community, and therefore it is a very bottom-up approach. And then it involves a lot of different narratives that are more relatable to that specific context. And then therefore, it has a different approach for different local cases. And so what the Ensen Kaihatsu does is a very craftsmanship development that is not really replicable in other places. So one area might be successful, but it doesn't mean another area can be the same success, because they will involve different people and then different narratives. In conclusion, what we can understand to compare with the typical TOD that everybody knows versus the Japanese TOD is that the TOD that everybody knows is a development methodology. And I would like to introduce a Japanese word that means methodology, which is called shuho. So shuho is a typical methodology whereby you can do the same thing in a different location, and then it will probably work in a similar effect. However, the Japanese TOD is not really a methodology. As I mentioned, it's more of a craftsmanship development, where you would relate it more with the local people, and then each context has its own history and narratives, so it will be very, very different to apply in different cases. And then therefore it is not shuho, but I can call it's a saho. In Japanese, it means, in English, it means customary way of making things. And these things, it includes the space, also it includes placemaking, and then also it includes events, and all these kind of things together is what I mean by the things. And all of this together is based on some customary way that is very different from context to context. Therefore, it cannot be repeated. Some successful cases may not be successful in another case. And everywhere you go, it will be slightly different from each other. So this is why it cannot be a methodology. And then therefore, this is the very, very reason why the Japanese TOD has never been actually recognized by the world. But in terms of let's say there are lessons that we can learn, the Japanese TOD is a very dynamic system, and it's very area-based. It's a bottom-up approach, and I think this kind of thing cannot be developed very, very fast. So if you're intending for a very fast development, of course the Japanese TOD system is not very appropriate, because the Saho approach, which is the customary way of making things, it involves a lot of negotiation. It's a very case-by-case development, and then it's also very gradual, it takes time, and then therefore it cannot be repeated in one place and then to another place. So this is the cons and pros of the Japanese TOD, but I think the 21st century development is something that we are seeking more for a quality of life instead of the quantity. So this kind of Saho, the Saho approach to development, I think could be some lessons to be learned from the past, and then I think we are now shifting towards the seeking for quality of life, and then therefore the development may not necessarily need to be very fast, but instead it can be gradual, it can be also case by case, and then perhaps this kind of Saho approach to development can be something that we can rethink of today. Okay. And lastly, I would like to recommend a book. Actually, this book is written in Japanese, but fortunately there is a publication for the first chapter that is written in English, and it's called Tokyo TOD Practice in Japan. Tokyo, a global city created by railways, and thanks to the authors, you can actually download this, the first chapter. I think the rest of the book is only in Japanese, unfortunately. But even if you just read the first chapter, it's very well written, and then you understand a lot of things. So a lot of the knowledge that I explained today is based on this, but also I've added a lot of my experience and also a lot of my interpretation. So you might have a different understanding to the development of the Japanese style TOD, but I think for me, what is important and the lesson that I have from the knowledge of the Japanese TOD is that it's more of a Saho approach rather than the methodology, which is the Shuho approach. Thank you very much for listening until the end. If you liked it, please subscribe to my channel. Bye bye.